Hey, we are live and we are recording, and I am so happy that you're here. So, I just wanted to come on here and just get really real and just cut to the heart of all of this food and body stuff and get you into a solution focused mindset right away because there is so much false information and misinformation going around out there. And to be honest, most of it is just throwing more diets and exercise plans at your deeper internal struggles. I mean, every expert is telling you something different to do, right? Like count carbs or count calories or fake it till you make it or work harder at the gym. And all this does is just confuse the daylights out of us, right? For me, it would just cause me to feel almost paralyzed because I didn't know what I should be doing. Because let's be honest, all of it works, right? Everything works until it stops working. And if you're watching this right now, you're probably starting to realize that if it really was as simple as just reading more books or going on yet another diet, you would have healed from this a long time ago. So I want to give you the tools and start equipping you to not let food run your life and to stop using food to fill an emotional void, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about in today's video. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Leanne Ellington, and I help diet-obsessed and food-crazed women just finally get off that all-or-nothing diet roller coaster and heal their relationship with food. But without all that restriction, obsession, and shame, and without needing years of therapy just to do it. And I call that stressless eating, and that's also the name of my book and my podcast. So I have a lot to cover today here in this video, and I'm going to try to keep it to 15 or 20 minutes. And I even have some trusty notes over here so I do not veer and I stay on track. So thank you so much for just being here today. And I appreciate you taking time out because, I know you're probably super busy. So I'm going to just hop right in. But if you do want to go, grab a coffee or a tea or something to drink and just find a quiet place where you can eliminate distractions, be alone, focused, 100% present, and just soak up the goodness. So today, I want to, talk about the habit of really, filling some sort of emotional void with food. So for some of you, it might not feel like a habit actually, but it might actually feel like a compulsion or an addiction. And the reason I want to talk to you about this today is because I see a lot of discussion about this from women online, like just dying to figure out how to stop doing this. But sometimes also kind of like commiserating with each other about how they feel totally out of control of food and feel like it has this emotional pull on them. And, really there's a lot of myths and bad information out there being passed around that actually makes the problem worse and can even add to more shame. So before we go try to put like a band-aid on it with some sort of quick tip or trick, like, just go on keto to control your insulin or, fast for 8 hours or just go do this or whatever the, air quote experts are telling you to do, I don't do that. I like to really just take a step back and really think about the problem so that we can really get into what's actually going on. So when it comes to why you turn to food to fill some sort of void, we really need to cover all of the following things. So whether you find yourself using food to fill a void of stress or boredom or loneliness, or maybe you're using food to comfort or numb or soothe or distract, and this really destroys us, right? Or maybe it's just that inevitable bounce back effect that comes off the back of a long period of restricting and depriving and controlling and dieting, right? Or maybe it's all of those things. So there's some things I want you to know about all of these things. And I wish somebody had just told me this stuff 20 years ago. It could have saved me a lot of suffering and a lot of confusion because ladies, and I really believe this is the most important part, there is so much toxic shame and stigma that comes alongside feeling totally off the rails when it comes to food. And oftentimes there's a lot of secrecy around it too, like no one else knows. And it leaves you feeling like food is like your dirty little secret, or as one of my clients calls it, her mistress, right? So there's so many women struggling with this and no one really talking about what it actually is or how to heal it. But also, I just want to help you just relinquish shame about it and just kind of, normalize it, but not normalize it in the way that you want to keep doing it, right? Like, yeah, we want to address it and squash it. But what I really mean by normalize it is just relinquish all that toxic shame. Because if you have been doing it for a long time, which you probably have, it has kind of become part of your normal life. So while we work on ditching it as a normal occurrence, you don't have to like it, right? I'm not going to ask you to like it. But if it is there, or if you are there right now, let's ditch the shame and just focus our eyes forward. Cool. So a little disclaimer, right? This one video is not going to magically solve your sugar binging problem or your incessant snacking after dinner problem or your screw it, I don't care, just give me the pizza problems, right? This is not a quick fix or a band-aid, and it's definitely not tips on how to tighten up your diet or train even harder or kick it up 1,000 notches. This is not that. So everything I share really is that less is more approach, I should say. But also healing the cycle of overeating will never happen if you're playing the game of sugar restriction and making food off limits or just approaching it as if it's a food problem altogether. Because here's what we know. It is possible to smash decades of binge eating, emotional eating, and self-sabotage if you know how to pull it from its roots and deal with it once and for all. And I promise you, yes, you can do all of this without needing years of therapy or opening up an emotional can of worms. And we're going to talk about how to heal it once and for all so that you can eat warm chocolate chip cookies or whatever your favorite foods are, but without the guilt, right? But also when it comes to all of this, the diet mentality, body shame, disordered eating, and all of that internal stress and chaos that comes alongside all of that, I just want to acknowledge that for so many women, this is their deepest health secret, right? Like, heck, a lot of women I talk to describe it as their dirty little secret. Like this struggle with food, their body, the war in their head, the fight in their hearts, and all of that shame, right? All that shame about their body, feeling so out of control all the time and feeling like a failure, right? For so many women, no one even knows what's really going on, and no one knows how much they're really struggling and suffering, and no one knows how much time and energy they're spending thinking about what they should or shouldn't eat, or what they should or shouldn't wear, or what they can wear that fits or doesn't look tight, right? And no one knows how much time they're thinking about how bad they actually feel. And no one really knows that they aren't even fully present in their lives. That even though they're there in the flesh and blood, like they aren't really there, right? They're not fully present. And so, I hear from women all the time, so many different things, but, thinking about and obsessing over things like, how many calories that salad dressing added to their salad at lunch, or if they should have told the waiter no croutons, right? Or one of my clients had so much anxiety about a work dinner coming up and feared that all of her husband's work friends would notice that she'd gained weight. And she was living in this fear that they would wonder like how she landed this like catch of a husband, because in her eyes, she couldn't fathom how a man like him would want to be with a woman like her. Like this is literally what women are sharing with me. And again, I can't even tell you how many women I talk to that when I talk about this idea of really like tuning in and learning a new language around food so that you don't have to constantly think about it and obsess about it and stress about it. And food can just be food. Like it can just be a part of your life, right? And feel normal around food. So many women are like, yeah, Leanne, like that sounds really great, but like, I can't even imagine that. Like I can't fathom that because this has been so deeply ingrained in my brain for so long. And truth is like, because diets and short-term band-aids are so readily available and they don't know that the kind of healing that we're talking about is actually an option, they hop back onto the next diet and the next diet. And I mean, like, trust me, there's no judgment. I did that for 30 years, right? And again, remember, it's that diet mentality that causes all of the binging and feeling out of control or saying, screw it, like, what's the point? I'm never going to heal this anyways. Or, whatever your version of the food prison is, we all have our own. It's a symptom or an effect of the diet mentality. And the diet mentality just makes all of that worse. And it causes us to go even deeper into the cycle of the diet cycle because we're so scared of what will happen if we don't. And we become so fearful that we will go gain a bunch of weight or just like go off this deep end that we have in our brain, like the metaphorical deep end, right? It's that prison of control. And even though it makes us miserable, it feels safer than getting out of it. It almost actually feels comfortable, even though it is so flipping uncomfortable, right? It's like the devil that you know versus the devil that you don't know. So we just stay stuck on it, right? But again, nobody knows. Like we put on a happy face and we pretend like everything's okay. but we're secretly terrified that if anyone knew how messed up we really were when it came to food, like the jig would be up, right? So can you see how it's this mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, just downward spiral? But again, I want to just reiterate, healing this cycle will never happen if you're playing the game of sugar restriction and making foods off limits, or just approaching it as if it is a food problem altogether. So if you want to address decades of binge eating, emotional eating, and self-sabotage, you must pull it from its roots and deal with it once and for all. So how do we do that, right? Sounds great in theory, right? So all I can do is tell you what I did, and it's the process that I walk each of my clients through. Okay. So, and I'm just going to get really real with you, but first off, I had to get really real with myself and what the problem really was, because until I identified the real problem, I would never be able to find a real solution. And the problem was not food, it was my thoughts about food. And the problem was not my body and my weight, it was my thoughts about my body and my weight. And the problem was not in my mind, or it wasn't just in my mind, I should say. It was in my heart, and it was emotional, right? And because it was emotional, I fired and wired really strong patterns in my brain alongside food and sugar that you can't out motivate or outsmart, right? As in, I fired and wired food to fill the void of things like sadness and loneliness and boredom, or comforting me when I needed comfort or didn't want to feel what I wanted to feel. And I truly felt like a food and sugar addict, right? So when it comes to healing all of that, here's what I did instead. So first, and again, this is that reality check, I realized that I needed to stop the dieting madness, right? That the diet mentality was making things worse. And on top of that, it didn't even work, right? I would take one step forward and two steps back every time I got off the diet. And I ended up even worse than I started. So first, I needed to stop looking to a diet to fix a problem that dieting was actually creating, right? Next, I realized that I never actually addressed like the psychology of food and my relationship with food, and how I was using food to soothe my stresses and fill emotional voids that in reality would never be filled by food. And that all I ever knew, because it's all I ever learned, was that, eat less, move more mentality. And that if I ever truly wanted to be free, like I needed to unbrainwash myself of the mindset of restriction and control and deprivation and punishment, and just learn a new way of thinking around food. And for me, I realized that food was honestly just one of the ways I was disconnected from myself and disconnected from my body. And that if I ever truly wanted to find peace of mind and happiness and freedom and all the things I really wanted, I needed to end that war I entered into a long time ago, where I was fighting myself and shaming myself and blaming myself and trying to control myself. And I needed to find a way to move towards peace and love and freedom. And then the biggie, I needed to learn how to become emotionally available to myself when my brain thought that it wanted food or sugar, but instead it was just fired and wired to reach for food or sugar in times of boredom or stress or loneliness or fill in the blank, right? Moral of the story, like I needed to reverse the brain damage of chronic dieting and rewire my brain if I ever wanted to conquer my struggles with food and self-sabotage. And I needed to stop believing that dieting was going to be the solution to get me there. And that dieting was something that I even wanted to get better at, right? Because that is one of the biggest myths and the biggest lies and the biggest like brainwashing that keeps women stuck. Because not only is it solving the wrong problem, but it keeps us stuck in a prison, in that prison that we're dying to get out of, right? And it's a prison of control and judgment and micromanaging every ounce of food that touches your lips. And it's a prison of restriction and deprivation that inevitably leads to guilt or shame when you can't sustain it, right? And it's a prison that we actually become afraid to leave, right? I mean, if it's all we've ever known, we become terrified to leave it. I mean, if you're anything like me, it was a conversation that went something like, okay, well, what will happen if I stop dieting, if I stop restricting? Like, I'll go off the deep end or gain a bunch of weight or insert dramatic story. And again, we all have our own story, right? So the ironic part is that, yes, it's a prison, right? But it's a prison that in some ways actually feels safe. Like it feels comforting because it's what we know. And the brain loves what it knows, even if it's not really that great, even if it outright sucks, right? Makes sense? So until we realize that it's not actually keeping us safe and that it's not actually comforting us, we stay stuck in it, right? But the cool thing is, if we choose it, we can break down those walls and we can escape anytime we choose and start moving in the direction of peace of mind and happiness and love and freedom, right? That's what you really want. Unfortunately, though, this line of thinking is not being taught. The world's throwing more diets at you, right? So what's the alternative? And in my opinion, the solution is just, first of all, to stop like trying to fix the problem with the same brain that created it, right? And step into a new conversation and a new paradigm. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give you the three most important questions that you need to ask yourself if you want to do that. If you want to start getting really real with your problems and start entering into a reality-based and solution-based conversation. Because if you ignore these questions, and I mean this with so much love, and I'm not trying to scare you, or just keep going down the road you're going down, like the problem will keep manifesting in your brain, right? Because again, you can't solve the problem with the same brain that created it. And it really is true what they say, like the truth will set you free, right? And I get it. The truth, it's not always sexy and it's not always easy to accept at first, but you know what's actually harder than the truth? Practicing ingraining more of what you have been teaching your brain and spending even more time and energy and heart and soul to lose weight in the short run, only to end up right back where you are right now in the long run, but still having to deal with all of this, like still not having a solution to your problems. So if you're ready, okay, there's three of them and they are super simple and they are black and white and they are binary and they are foolproof. Okay. So question number one is, are you walking towards freedom, like food freedom and body freedom and just like freedom in your heart, or are you walking away from it? Okay. And it really is that simple. If you are walking away from it, so like, restriction, deprivation, chronically dieting and obsessing over food or your weight, the truth is you are walking away from your freedom and you're actively outvoting it. So that's question number one. Okay. And again, it's not always easy, but the goal is to just start approaching this in a really reality driven way. And these are the reality check questions. Okay. So question number two is, are you walking towards happiness? As in, day to day, do you feel happy doing what you're doing? Like, is the plan or strategy you're following making you happy? Or you guessed it, are you walking away from happiness? Okay. So again, I know this is not rocket science, right? It's super simple. But if you are walking away from it, AKA shame and stress and confusion and self-criticism, and once again, obsessing over food or your weight, the truth is you are walking away from happiness and you're actively outvoting it. So that is question number two. And question number three is, and it's a reality check. There's no right or wrong. We just want to get real, right? Are you walking towards peace and peace of mind? Or are you actively walking away from peace, like living in stress or worry or anxiety, or feeling like you're constantly burnt out or hemorrhaging your energy, right? Or once again, just spending so much time, energy, and mental real estate thinking about food or your weight. And living in this place is actively outvoting your peace. So again, I told you the truth isn't always easy, but I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't at least hold the mirror up to you and help you get really real with yourself so that you can actually move past this. Okay. Because here's the reality. And I mean this with so much love. If whatever you are committing to, right? The plan, the program, the strategy, the coach, whatever it is, if it makes you feel restricted, confined, deprived, or you just have to force yourself to do it or stick with it, you are actively outvoting freedom. Okay. If whatever you're committing to makes you feel unhappy, or it robs you of joy, or steals your smiles, or outright just doesn't make you feel very good, you're actively outvoting happiness. Okay. And if whatever you're committing to, it just, stresses you out, it overwhelms you, it bogs you down, it weighs you down, right? Or like your heart and soul knows that you're not going to be able to stick with it very long or forever, you are actively outvoting peace of mind, right? And if whatever it is that you're committing to causes you to feel shame and blame and guilt or comparisonitis, or maybe it's perfectionism, you are actively outvoting love and self-love. Okay. So I invite you to think about the problem that you're currently solving. And for most women, the only one that they know how to try to solve is to focus on their weight. But that being said, I want you to think about the problem that you're actively trying to solve. And I want you to just lovingly ask yourself, like, are you solving the right problem, right? So many women that I talk to are solving the wrong problem. And they're unconsciously thinking that dieting or weight loss or focusing on the outsides will magically solve her internal problems, like using logic and reason and willpower to solve an emotional struggle, right? But when it comes to, reaching for food when you're stressed or bored or lonely, or, if it's become your go-to when you feel any, negative emotion, and really there's no negative emotions, there's just emotions, right? Or if food is your source of comfort or distraction, or you simply just soothe yourself with food, there's so much more going on in your brain that I promise you doesn't have anything to do with the actual food itself. And so, again, you've simply fired and wired a pattern in your brain that got fired alongside food. And that's why, changing your diet and your exercise plan will never address the problems that are happening in your brain, right? You'll always end up right back in alignment with what's happening in your brain, right? But also, and there is no shame and no judgment, just love. I promise you, I've been here, right? But if dieting and the diet mentality hasn't worked up until now, or, if the diet mentality was ever really truly going to work for you, don't you think it would have worked for you by now? And I wish that somebody would have warned me that the thing I was chasing or thought would save me, right? Save me, was actually making things worse. Like this conversation that we're having right now could have saved me years of struggling and suffering and pain. And I wouldn't be who I am if I didn't at least share it with you right now, right here, right? So now I turn it back over to you. So I genuinely invite you to just explore the lines of thinking and questioning that I shared in this video. And I want you to just imagine, like, what if you entered into a different conversation? Like, what if you entered into this conversation, right? What do you think you would create? And more importantly, like, what do you think you'd be able to stop creating, right? What if you actually explored, healing the root cause of your own struggles and reversing the brain damage of chronic dieting, and just rewired your brain so that you could just finally conquer all your struggles, the food struggles, the self-sabotage struggles, rather than keep trying to diet them all away, right? And what if you stopped believing that dieting was the solution that was going to get you there? And that, like, it was something that you even wanted to get better at, right? Especially if the diet mentality has only led you to frustration, stress, and self-doubt, and that one step forward, two steps back dance, right? So honestly, what do you have to lose, right? And that's really what I wanted to share with you today, and that's what I wanted to leave you with. So that's it for today. So I hope you enjoyed today's video and got whatever you needed to hear from what I had to share with you. So I'm Leanne Ellington, and thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time. Bye.